I have no idea what it is, so please do start with the easy stuff.
Great.
So my name is Shawn Marshall. I want to thank you all for having me here today. I'm coming up to visit you from the San Francisco Bay Area, specifically from Marin County, where we were the first county in the state of California to start the first CCA program called Marin Clean Energy. Subsequently, I formed an organization called Lean Energy, which is a nonprofit organization based on sharing resources and information related to clean energy CCA around the state and the country. So what I'm here today to do is provide as brief as possible CCA 101, so you understand what the model is and how it's working, and then happy to answer any questions from there. So we'll just start off with an illustration that we like to use, which just shows how CCA works as a shared service model, shared between a single local government or groups of local governments that get together and work in partnership with an investor-owned utility, such that the local governments will form a CCA program that then takes on the responsibility for electric generation, typically through procurement. Sometimes now we're starting to get into some power development. It partners with the existing investor-owned utility, which continues to provide all of the pole and wire infrastructure, so all of the transmission and distribution of that electricity. It continues to provide consolidated billing to the customer and handles all of the grid maintenance. If, for example, there's an outage, you would still call your utility to handle all of that. And so at the end of the day, the end-use customer, in terms of just from a logistics point of view, experiences nothing different, because they're still receiving their bill from the IOU, they're still paying the IOU. The big difference is what is put on the grid on behalf of those customers is typically cleaner and greener. And so far, what we're seeing across the country and in the state of California, the electric generation rates have been able to be lower than what is currently offered by the incumbent utility. So the takeaway there is that it is a shared service model. Worth noting that it does not interrupt existing direct access customer contracts, and it does not typically include areas already served by a public utility. Here's just a quick picture of the national context. CCA is, we're beginning to also spread around the country. We're currently providing support in New Hampshire. This slide is a little bit dated. Also in the state of Virginia. It's worth noting that CCA works differently in different parts of the country. So in states that are deregulated, they have full retail electricity, like Illinois, Ohio. They call it municipal aggregation. It works differently than in states like California, where you have partial deregulation. In that regard, we feel that Oregon is the most similar to California, and so that's the model I'm going to be discussing today. And it is on the rise in California. It took a long time to get the law passed, the regulatory rules written, the first proof of concept through Marin and Sonoma, and now since 2015, it really has begun to take off. The counties there in orange are operational CCAs. In green, those are CCAs that are scheduled to launch this year. So you can see that it's an almost doubling happening this year. We're very busy. And in the light blue, these are other counties throughout the state that are currently investigating the model. Currently, CPUC projects that 50% of the state of California will be served by CCA by 2020, moving on up to 85% by 2025. And so that's, as you can see, that's a significant increase really over a period of about 10 years. The core values and benefits of a CCA program really rest on what we call the three legs of the stool. The first of which is consumer choice. So CCA does offer a choice where, especially in the residential sector, where currently there hasn't been a choice, and that would be the same here in Oregon. So far, they are offering competitive and generally lower electric generation rates than the IOU. And also stable rates, because they don't tend to move rates up and down many times throughout the course of a year. Consumers also have access to local or perhaps regional staff, innovative new programs. There's a lot going on right now with some interesting battery storage with Tesla, for example, and local accountability, that there are meetings that are held in the local jurisdiction once a month. Rates are set there, and it is locally governed. In terms of economic development, CCAs operate as a redirected revenue source that supports the program and stays local. So this program does not require public subsidy. It is the electric generation portion of the IOU's bill that gets redirected to support the CCA, because that electric generation is now moving to the CCA's responsibility. Rate savings that are enjoyed by consumers circulate back into the local economy. And finally, local programs, local project development generally equals new jobs. And in a future slide, I'll talk to you a little bit about the number of new jobs that have been produced in California. Finally, a big reason that the state of California has moved towards CCA is the ability to accelerate the achievement of environmental goals. We've seen that it is the fastest accelerator toward carbon reduction and renewable energy development, again, without the need for public subsidy. I'll run quickly through the basic program mechanics. So if you all decided to get interested in CCA, one of the first things you would have to do is to know whether or not you would have to have enabling legislation, as we did in California, or if it would possibly fit into existing regulatory structure. So you would look at how will it be enabled in your state. Local governments participate either by passing an ordinance or by running a local ballot initiative. In California, it is by ordinance. CCA across the country, this is uniform. It is established as an opt-out program, sort of similar to other municipal programs such as sewer or garbage. All customers are switched over, always having the choice to opt out and remain with the incumbent utility. But in order to achieve any kind of scale, it is served up as an opt-out program. That means that the CCA is responsible for customer noticing and customer switching, and there are many requirements for, in California for that. The utility continues to provide consolidated billing, grid maintenance, all the transmission and distribution. The electric generation charges, including, and this is important, an exit fee, which in California we call the power charge and difference adjustment. You all have dealt with similar exit fees, I think, for your direct access customers. Those all appear as a new line item on the customer bill that is sent from the utility. That electric generation charge replaces the charge that currently is provided through the utility. In California, programs for low-income customers, medical baseline, Federal Emergency Relief Administration, those programs are untouched. They remain the same. And the last thing to say, and I think this is important, this is not like a public utility in that the PUC continues to play a very important role because it's, again, a shared service model. So they certify the CCA plans, oversee service agreements, regulate resource adequacy, which is a key issue right now in our state, resource planning, compliance, etc. Oh, excuse me. Just quickly, this is a copy of a Pacific Gas and Electric bill, like one that I get at my home. What this indicates here is that on the top line, you see the current PG&E electric delivery charges. Right below it, Marin Clean Energy electric generation charges. Again, those are replacing the previous PG&E electric generation. On the second page, you see a reference to light green and deep green. Deep green is our 100% renewable product offered at a price premium. At my home, that runs about $7 a month. And then on a third page that you don't see here, you would have the exit fee that is borne by the customer. However, it is included when you set the rates. And so when you set the rates, you're looking to make sure that you can be competitive to the IOU inclusive of that utility exit fee. So here's some key results in the state of California. In 2016, we looked at almost 940,000 metric tons of carbon reduction. That is expected to exceed 2 million metric tons this year with the new programs coming online. Customer savings last year exceed $10 million. Again, looking to double this year. CCA customer accounts in 2017 were almost 2 million, approaching 3 million when we bring East Bay Community Energy, which is the city of Oakland. San Jose is also launching this year, and parts of Los Angeles. Just briefly here, what I'll say about this slide, these are various fuel sources. The green is renewable energy. The light blue is large hydro. The peach color is nuclear. Yellow is coal. Gray is natural gas. And the light gray is unspecified system power. The takeaways on this chart here, the first two bars are Pacific Gas and Electric and Southern California Edison. Those are our two largest IOUs in the state. The takeaways here are that 3/4 of the CCAs are exceeding the state renewable portfolio standard and exceeding the investor-owned utilities, both from a renewable and carbon reduction metric perspective. They're at 75 to 100% clean power, usually within the first year to two of operations. The 30% that are not choosing to ratchet up the clean power, it's generally because they are seeking deeper rate discounts for their customers. And these are the kinds of choices that you are fully able to make as long as you're meeting the state mandates for all load-serving entities. This is just a quick picture of the new power that has come online as a result of CCA and the diversification in the market, so that you don't now just have 3 large IOUs being the counterparty. You now have multiple CCAs, which has really opened up the market, spurred tremendous renewable energy development and new ways of doing business, and actually even spurring distributed energy resource and small-scale projects at the local level as well. Worth noting here that many of these projects have project labor agreements and union labor agreements. I don't know if that's an issue up here, but it has been in the state of California. Most of these projects are union supported. This is just another example, this time at the local level. This is an excerpt from the city of San Mateo, which is a city south of San Francisco, that did a climate action plan. They had a third-party consultant come in and take a look at what the impacts would be of all of the different initiatives that they were looking at the local level. The very bottom line is community choice energy, or community choice aggregation. And you can see, to a factor of 2 to 3, the level of carbon reduction that's possible by switching the fuel that is placed on the grid on the customer's behalf. And that's really what's going on here, is that we're aggregating electric power, we're changing what we're buying on behalf of those customers. Just wrapping up here, some trends to note. There is growing interest around the country, but in particular in the West, in this issue around consumer energy choice at the residential level, not just for the large C&I customers, and in electric competition. The public, we've experienced a greater demand for clean power sources that are offered at an affordable rate. Local governments are searching for affordable and, frankly, self-funding sustainability initiatives. This definitely would fall in that category. You all may be aware that there is quite a push now for grid electrification and, frankly, regionalization. California has certainly been looking at that. I know that this is something you all are looking at. Considerations that I'm sure that Julie and staff are looking at. Can you compete on price? The only way you're going to know that is to take a look at this and run a feasibility study and really look at the metrics of what your market is doing here, how it would work, and can you be price competitive. Until you know that, it's really not something that you probably want to go headlong into until you understand how it pencils out. The next is all of the various rules of the road from a regulatory perspective. You all have dealt already with the issue of cost shifting. We also are struggling a little bit with this exit fee, with the stranded asset issue, with resource adequacy. These are all things just to be aware of, to learn from your neighbors, and to get the rulemaking out there in plenty enough time so that you've sort of figured out what those transition rules are going to be. Fortunately, the CPUC is a little bit behind on this, and so we're playing catch up, and it has been a challenge. And then the last is just taking a look at the availability of renewable and carbon-free resources. Projects like your pump storage that we were just talking about are of great interest, and CCAs can certainly be an off-taker for that power, and I imagine might be interested in some of the Swan Lake power in the northern part of our state. Last but not least, I'll just wrap up by saying that Lean Energy, which is our organization, is supporting expansion in the western states, mainly just getting out there and educating, doing what I'm doing right now. In Oregon and in Nevada, they have an electric retail ballot initiative happening in November, and then also in the state of Washington. So I hope that wasn't too fast and high level, but I'm happy to take any questions that you have. Thank you for your time.
Shawn, when do you need to leave us?
I'd like to hit the road by 4, but I'll stay as long as necessary.
Well, I'm going to have questions for you immediately, and then we'll get to Jason and Julie. Questions for Ms. Marshall? Vice Chair Resch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming. I like this idea. I think this is the idea of the future. Many multiple generation with kind of a highway of transmission lines. My question really is, how do you price it less than the IOUs? Because the only place I can see where you can do that is either you're more efficient in generating the power, or you're taking less margin, or maybe it's a combination of both of those.
So it's really been a couple of things. The first of which is that your overhead costs are significantly lower because you're not paying shareholders. These are public entities. So you don't have a lot of those sort of administrative layers added in here in terms of overhead costs. The second reason is that CCA is able to access the wholesale market. So similar to what your large C&I direct access customers are able to do, they're accessing the wholesale market and able to get power at rates that are competitive with the IOU, even with the add-on of that exit fee. And that's challenging because that really reduces the headroom. The rates, energy prices have been very good. As I say, so far we've been below the IOU costs, but what we talk about really is being price competitive with the IOUs. They also have quite a few legacy contracts that frankly were more expensive, and so we're just able to compete with more recent contracting.
Right.
Do you have a follow-up?
Just a real quick follow-up. On average, what would you say your average price is less than the IOU? I mean, are you 5% or
Yes.
20%?
No.
5.
In
Okay.
Illinois, it was 20%,
Okay.
but that didn't last. So generally, it's somewhere between 1 and 5%.
Okay.
I would not say that electric generation rate savings is the number one reason. It's really mixed in with greening the grid and providing choice as the trifecta of the core value.
Thank you.
Further questions? Representative Barnes.
Thank you. Again, elementary question that I have no idea what the answer is. Exit fee. Could you describe that to us, and what's it for?
Sure. It's for the purpose of keeping the customers who choose to remain with the IOU unaffected from departing load. And so what it is essentially paying for the stranded costs of customers leaving the utility service, going over here. It's sort of very similar, frankly, to when cell phones came into existence and you were breaking up all of the Bell system and now you had cell phones. Well, you had to pay for those stranded costs so that those customers who remain are not left holding the bag.
Thank you. And if I could, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
When you're talking about stranded costs, I assume that includes that legacy
Yes.
power generation that you were describing. I mean, I'm guessing that one of the reasons why this works is because you can be a lot more nimble than the guy who's got another 40 years to run on his contract with an old system.
Correct, and sometimes those old systems were more expensive, and also California had some renewable energy requirements on the heels of deregulation and some of the electricity crisis that we had. So there were some requirements that were placed on the IOUs that made it expensive. So what we talk about in the state of California is, don't necessarily follow the same exact procurement policies that the IOUs have. So, you're not trying to just emulate what's been done before, that it's really important to remain nimble, to remain, have a certain level of open position in your portfolio so that you can be opportunistic with pricing, and to hire the right people to do it. And so far, the results speak for themselves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Holby.
Thank you. I appreciate the presentation. I'm curious, though, about your snapshot of CCA portfolios, where a couple of your graphs show 35% of renewables and then 65% unspecified. And I'm looking at the list of other energy sources and just kind of curious, what's an example of unspecified energy source? Because I'm kind of curious how you get to this really clean portfolio when 65% of it's unspecified.
Yep. So unspecified is what we call California system power. And so that's just the regular power that is running up and down our grid. It is predominantly natural gas. And so that's Apple Valley Community Energy, and they are located in an area that is serving a relatively low-income population. And so they aggregated with the intent of really saving their customers money. That was their very first priority. And so they chose to go with a resource mix that did not feature as much clean power as some of the other CCAs.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Mr. Marshall, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And if you need to, you go ahead and feel
I look
welcome
forward to hearing
to go.
from my colleagues here, so I'm going to stick
Right.
around
Oh, okay,
until I have
very
to go.
good.
Shall I stay here?
Please do stay right there. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Helm, members of the committee. I am Jason Eisdorfer. I am the Program Director of the Public Utility Commission. With me is Julie Peacock, Senior Policy Advisor, and is the lead of our new Strategic Initiatives Group. We're going to have a discussion and a that's not the right one, discussion about Senate Bill 978. But before we launch into that, and it's through 978, I think that's where the discussion of the community choice aggregation may come in. We want to describe that process. But before we do that, since we haven't been here this session, I want to just remind you all who we are. So Julie and I are staff at the Public Utility Commission. The Commission represents utility customers of the private and investor-owned utilities, electric, natural gas, water, and also incumbent telecom carriers. And we represent the public interest generally as well. So on the electric side, we are regulating the rates, services, and quality of Portland General Electric, Pacific Corp, and Idaho Power. Natural gas side, it's Northwest Natural, Avista, and Cascade. We determine the rates and the other service issues through contested case process. Decisions made by the three-member commission are determined on the record, and people frequently call us a quasi-legislative, quasi-judicial decision process. My group consists of telecom and water, energy resources and planning, energy rates, finance and audit, and the safety, reliability, and security divisions. And just briefly, our mission statement is to ensure Oregon utility customers have access to safe, reliable, and high-quality utility services at just and reasonable rates. And this is done through robust and thorough analysis and independent decision-making conducted in an open and fair process. So with that, I would turn to Senate Bill 978. It was during the session last year that the legislature recognized that there are a variety of trends, policy, technology, and customer-driven, that are significantly impacting the electricity sector. These trends include environmental policies, technical advances in distributed generation and the distribution system itself, and the evolution of customer values and services preferences. In response to 978, which passed unanimously in both houses, that bill requires the Commission to set up a public process to examine the current regulatory system with its existing set of obligations, incentives, and benefits, then to investigate how those trends impact the current regulatory system, how they may be changing expectations or maybe even exposing flaws in the current system. And then finally, the Commission is to explore potential for any changes to the Commission's regulatory design that do not compromise affordability, safety, and reliable service. The Commission is to report back to the Legislature in September to describe our progress. So we started our 978 process with outreach to key stakeholders in December. We met with stakeholders, both old and new, and asked them what they would like to see in this public engagement process. In my nearly 20 years of experience with the Commission, both as an external stakeholder and with the Commission itself, this is the most extensive stakeholder outreach I have seen. We've heard from stakeholders that the process should not have a predetermined outcome, there should be no surprises, that we need to include some educational elements to make sure we're all starting from the same page. These changes to the electricity system are potentially profound, dealing with everything from the kind and quality of the generation output to the kinds of services that customers expect and deserve. So we released a schedule to the stakeholders at our first meeting in January. This schedule breaks the process into 3 phases: the examination of the current system, the investigation into policies and technology trends, and then the identification of potential changes to the regulatory design. I think Julie's going to run through basically a version of what we gave to stakeholders in January to run through the road map that we've set out for ourselves.
Great. Good afternoon, Chair Hall, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Julie Peacock, staff at the Public Utility Commission. I will go over our schedule and some of the high-level process the Commission has outlined in order to implement SB 978. I'll also briefly talk about where specific topics like community choice aggregation may come up during our investigation. In its SB 978 implementation work plan, from January until June, the Commission is planning on hosting 1 meeting per month with our stakeholders, with an optional meeting in July if that is deemed necessary. We held our first stakeholder workshop on January 30th, which we really saw as a welcoming to stakeholders to the process and an opportunity for them to ask questions about what our overall process is anticipated to look like. For February and March, as you can see here, our meetings are designed around creating a shared starting point among stakeholders on what the existing system looks like, how it operates, and how to provide an opportunity for them to share their experience with the existing system. Our April and May meetings will focus on an investigation into the current technology and policy trends, things like variable energy resources, greater customer sophistication, and a greater recognition of the carbon output of electricity resources. The review of these trends will lead us into thinking about some of the problem statements I think we've all heard somewhat generally. That is, how do we make adjustments to the existing system to allow for things like greater customer choice or transportation electrification, while still providing for affordable rates and safety and reliability? Part of the question we are asking ourselves is, what is it that we're trying to solve for? What do we understand as the biggest subjects that need to be tackled? And why those subjects and not other subjects? Much of our conversation in the months of June and July will focus on these topics. If the subject of community choice aggregation is raised by our stakeholders, this is the point at which I anticipate that will happen, but only after we identify what it is we're trying to solve for. One thing we are trying to be careful to do in designing our process is not talk about specific solutions or outcomes without first going through the exercise of talking about what we want the electric system to look like and what services we would like for it to deliver. For example, in our first meeting, we did an exercise where we asked stakeholders to start thinking about what their goals for the system were, things beyond the traditional 3, which are safety, reliability, and affordability. Topics that emerged were equity, climate change mitigation, community well-being and human health, customer choice, and competition. In the June and July timeframe, we'll start talking with our stakeholders about how these goals can overlap at times, but also how they can be in competition with one another. In these circumstances, we are going to ask stakeholders to think about how to develop a balance between goals that can be oppositional at times. For example, affordability may not always line up with a goal that focuses on economic development. So how do we understand those goals working together? And then we've reserved the end of July, August, and September for the much anticipated report writing phase. So just a quick summary. The Commission is currently in the current system examination phase of 978, where we're working to create a shared starting point for all of our stakeholders. The problem or issue statement development phase will be during spring and summer of this year, and then the solution development phase will be much later in the process and may come as the result of additional processes opened after the Commission's report to the Legislature on September 15th of this year. So we've included information here. If people want to engage in the process, we created a website, which is actually somewhat novel for the Commission. We have an e-docket system that some people have said that it's not that fun to navigate. So we created a web page where all the information related to SB 978 is there. If you would like to join our listserv and be notified of meetings or documents that we're distributing, you can email our public hearings division at the puc.hearings@state.or.us. And then finally, our third meeting will be March 21st, starting at 9 a.m. Thank you.
Questions from the committee? Representative.
Just clarity, my laptop sort of died while I was looking up Senate Bill 978. Can you remind me, does Senate Bill 978 just deal with the systems within IOUs, or is it a statewide look that takes in public power as well, like the BPA and...
Chair Helm, Representative Hovey, it's specific to the investor-owned utilities, which represent something a little bit north of 70% of the load in the state.
Chair Helm and Representative Hovey, the one thing I would add is that as part of our stakeholder outreach, we did outreach to pretty much any entity that we could think of that would be engaged. And so we have had some engagement from some of the consumer-owned utilities who are just interested in the process. And so they're coming and they're just seeing what the conversation is like. Also, the natural gas utilities have shown some interest in participating.
Thank you. And I know the IOUs do a large share of the electricity delivered, but geographically, maybe not quite that large.
Right.
Any other questions, committee? All right, well, thank you. I'm just looking at, so colleagues, if you are wanting to follow this process, I'm looking at parts of the website right now, or the page on the Commission's website, and it looks to me like we're still in the phase of deciding what you want to talk about and study. So folks that are interested can still have the opportunity to shape the list of topics that will be considered. Would that be correct to say?
Chair Helm, absolutely. I think that we are tracking the statute pretty closely, and that statute directs that we take some time first to look at the existing system, and in doing that, I think we've engaged the stakeholders in not only looking at the existing system, but what values do you derive from that, what values are missing from the existing system. So yes, I think it's fair to say we're still in that initial phase of scoping this out.
Very good. Okay, thank you very much. And Ms. Marshall, thank you very much for sharing your experience from California with us.
You bet.
Appreciate it. Safe travels.